Over the past few months, I had a chance to work on a new application, and I figured I would try out the latest hype. Apparently, you can build applications nowadays by just vibe coding. So I figured, after all the YouTube videos, I have to try it myself. Those videos nowadays on YouTube are more common than NordVPN ads, so that's already pretty impressive. So even though I was skeptical, I really wanted to try it and see whether it is feasible to actually build an application from the ground up with vibe coding. I need a good test subject for it, and at the time I was working on Drognet. And I figured that the UI component, so the application is split into two parts, would be a very good target to test vibe coding on. So just a little bit about Drognet, what it is. It's a tool basically for anonymous reporting to MISP. It allows basically some interactions with the data submitted afterwards by the users, and it's a token-based client association system. But the interesting part here is really that the UI and the backend was split, and the UI in itself has no risks. It has no data storage, so it felt like a low-risk application to test vibe coding on. So my initial ground rules were that I was going to do something where the LLM really decides everything from the ground up. So that means tech stack, structure, naming, everything from the get-go. Even the logo comes from LLM. So the idea was that I was only going to use vibe coding in the sense that I didn't want to touch the code myself. I wanted to fix everything by prompting it. I mean, that's what the pros do on all the YouTube videos, so figured that would work. So my technology choice at the time, it was just before ChatGPT 5 came out, so 4.0 for all the decision making. So that's the more generic large language model, 0.4 mini-high for the code generation itself. And then for minor refinements, I didn't want to go to ChatGPT. I was using Copilot's integration in VS Code. Felt like a good plan. So the initial plan that the LM came up with was based on my requirements of what I wanted the application to do, is to use Alpine.js. I had absolutely zero experience with it. I had to Google what the hell it was. So great. Together with Bootstrap and just raw HTML and CSS. The idea was to use a single page application, and for the storage of the tokens on client side, it would use local storage. So sounded great. The other requirement was to use MISP objects for the generating of dynamic forms. So this also prompted Alpine.js as the choice. Apparently, it's a lightweight format that is good with dynamic forms. I took ChatGPT's word for it. So initially, I started out with this, and early on, it seemed super promising. So things were kind of working, and they were shaping up. Some of the functionalities were working pretty fast. It started looking quite okay, much better than what I would design, because I'm absolutely terrible at UI, so I was already happy with that. Even the dynamic forms, which I expected to be the biggest hurdle, worked really well. So it was basically a translation layer that took MISP JSON objects, and it converted them into actual forms that were extensible based on the user input. So it worked pretty well. So at this point, seeing the future, I considered looking for alternate careers. Goat farming seemed pretty promising because it went super well until it didn't. So at one point, the LLM decided to go rogue on me. So it decided to make its own decisions. And during one of the refactors, it just dropped Alpine.js entirely. I didn't even notice this until several commits later, that the entire thing was purged and it went to raw.js for everything. Okay. Weird decision, but sure. It also figured that I don't actually need a single page application, and it started building separate HTML files for each individual view, which was a nightmare because it started copying the menu over into each of them, and that meant that any change would have to be reflected across all the different files. It also decided to slightly alter the CSS for each of the pages. So when you're pivoting from one page to the next, you saw discolorations, slight differences in the menu. So it was a disaster. The other thing was that whenever I asked it to refactor or improve anything, it would just barf out a new version of the file. And the new version of the file silently dropped things, introduced new things. It was always like a Christmas present opening ceremony. anything that had to deal with changing files or changing multiple files in one shot. So, for example, trying to decouple the menus from those individual views and so on turned into really a battle with the LLM and trying to get it to actually do what I want. It kept trying to focus on only one file, forgetting everything else, so it didn't really work well. There were some parts of the application that were consistent across each of the pages, and also the handling of that didn't really work out without a lot of back and forth prompting. Something that ended up helping, and for anyone trying to do this, constantly sending the full archive of your entire project to the LLM to rebase its current state to that helped a little bit. But this is something that is feasible for tiny projects, not something that you can do for anything larger. So that already kind of rules this functionality out. And the other thing that was really scary was the divergence, and then the issues started to increase over time. So the issues that I saw initially really started compounding. Internally, what was the apparent reason for the degradation was really a context limit. So the LLM started forgetting previous things we discussed. It started reintroducing the same issues. It started dropping parts of the code base. So it started to be really, really difficult to handle the code. Then there was a more practical issue. I was using the web client. And Chrome started refusing to actually work with the large chat that we already had built up. So since everything is nicely rendered and colored and so on with the code snippets, the HTML was utterly massive. So every time I sent a prompt, my Chrome just crashed. I had to open Chrome up again, go back to the chat and get the result. So it was a disaster. So I tried to move to a new chat and figured that would work pretty well. I'm sure this is a solved issue. Turns out not entirely. So ChatGPT has some built-in functionalities to export a JSON representation of the previous chats. That in itself was an utter shit show. But once you added into some additional pointers to the LLM, including a description of what has happened before, what we discussed before, as well as basically again zips of the entire repository, it started to be at least somewhat usable. But the whole thing felt like Groundhog Day now with HTML. So the other part was that the code ended up being functional, but the security aspect was basically dog shit. So it absolutely didn't do anything against XSS, no sanitization at all for anything. I don't know what kind of code it was trained on, but it's quite scary to think about that. So, but overall, the great thing with it is whenever you look at the code, it's really pretty. So when you first look at it, it looks like, oh, this is something really well structured, probably. Then you start reading it and that's not reality, but it looks nice at least. Basically, each prompt and each improvement risked undoing something from before. So at this point, the whole process was so frustrating. I didn't really know what to do next. And the whole thing absolutely fell apart in the last 20%. So once I had a basic prototype that kind of worked, I was going into the refinement phase, and that's where nothing worked anymore. So anytime I tried the refinement, I lost a lot of time on just trying to fix the issues it introduced. So at this point, it was so frustrating that I gave up on my project, and I ended up finishing the last 20% by hand. The conclusion for that was that the time investment to fix these issues just weren't worth it anymore. So yeah. In the end, the lessons learned from the whole thing, it is good for some things. So some of the parts of the development were really good with it, especially the conceptual planning part. So the initial plan that it came up with made sense. So that is something that I could have implemented probably manually and it would have worked. For small isolated tasks, when it doesn't need the entire context, it worked really well. So especially in other projects, I tried it for SQL tuning and so on. For tasks like that, it's fantastic. But the moment that you have a larger context that it needs to keep in mind, it falls apart. It is absolutely terrible also with dealing with multiple files at the same time. It seems to focus on one file and ignores everything around it. And for any long and iterative projects that you want to maintain over a long time, it's generally a terrible fit. And yeah, basically consider it being pair programming with a goldfish. So it's so that last 20% really became 200%, and the whole thing in hindsight, it was about a 2-3 week project to build the UI. It could have been done in a week by just writing it myself. So in the end, it was a loss of time, even though. And something that was really weird with this was that it didn't feel like it, so it's kind of deceptive, because most of the time of the day you're spending waiting for the prompt to actually write out the result. So you feel like you're relaxed and it's going fast, but in reality, if you measure up the time, it's really terrible. Good scoping really helps. So if you want to use it, if you can scope your problems into tiny compartments, working with those works pretty well. But if you throw like an entire thing, build me an app, what the YouTubers usually say, and it's really good at building Flappy Bird, but for some reason they only show Flappy Bird. So the moment that you cannot scope it that narrowly, it falls apart. So yeah, and then the part where it forgot about Alpine.js was something that I'll never understand. And even though it was a failure compared to my experiment a year before it was still a huge improvement compared to what it was like. So in a few years, maybe goat farming is still on the table. We'll see. So yeah, that's basically it.